guard. I talked to the security guard just in there. He said he has been given specific orders to prevent employees of USAID from entering the building today. And I just find that to be absolutely ridiculous. This is no way to govern. This is no way to treat public servants. And this is no way for us to conduct our foreign policy as a country. So I just had to show up today, see it with my own eyes, the chaos of this administration and just their attacks upon public servants in our country.
Does the White House know what USAID does?
I think that there's a lot of questions, and Katie, I think that, frankly, the President of the United States has not answered about his understanding of what this $40 billion operation that effectively works with, more than 100 different organizations, more than 60 different missions globally to work as a conduit for congressionally appropriated funds for humanitarian assistance and local development projects. And what Donald Trump in the Oval Office just a short time ago acknowledged to the press corps was that, in fact, he is okay with the way that Elon Musk has gone about effectively crippling the backbone of U.S. humanitarian assistance organization. And not only that, but also Elon Musk's efforts within the Treasury Department to gain access through employees of payment disbursement files. But then also when you're looking at Elon Musk and in that Spaces conversation he had in After Midnight last night, Katie, it is a suggestion that they are willing to freeze billions of dollars in foreign assistance, but also potentially other payments. And what we heard from the president was no suggestion that he has any interest in putting a stop to the efforts of Elon Musk. We heard from some of those Democratic lawmakers on the literal front line of the government offices there at USAID headquarters, which was shut down today, and staffers who have not been fired or furloughed were told not to come to that office. And what you heard from some of those Democratic lawmakers was the argument that Elon Musk, the billionaire, has effectively been allowed to access not only personnel files, but also cut off congressionally approved funds.
Joins us, Michael. We're going to start with USAID because, and remember, Eli Crane just sent me the video from a year ago. Remember we did those all-night appropriations fights? Eli Crane and Matt Gaetz remind me that they tried to defund USAID, and they got less than 50% of the House votes. Less than 50% of the House votes. This is how feckless House Republicans are. Mike Benz, is USAID just funds 160 humanitarian institutions to do humanitarian and development projects for the good people of the United States of America? Is that its task and purpose, sir?
No, it's not even allowed to do that. It's a U.S. foreign policy vehicle. You have to understand, everything USAID does by charter is dual use. Under the cover of humanitarian work, they so-called advance U.S. national interests by accomplishing some goal in the region. Now, they don't actually accomplish U.S. national interest in the region. What they do is they accomplish the commercial or political goals of a very small secular elite within the United States and their international partners. So, for example, I've published about hundreds of different USAID scandals, from them claiming to run AIDS prevention clinics in Cuba and in all over South America, and it turns out that the AIDS prevention clinics were actually covers for undercover agents to sow anti-government dissent and to try to organize a revolution in the country. You had the case of Zunzuneo, where USAID took humanitarian funds earmarked for Pakistan and created a fake knockoff Twitter social media site where USAID documents explicitly stated in their own internal documents that the plan was to get 100,000 people in the country to join up to this social media service, luring them in with news feeds predominated by sports, news, and hurricane updates. And then at the appropriate moment, once enough people were onboarded, to hit them with messages to overthrow their government and take to the streets in smart mobs. You see this time and time again. You will see all over the news and all over these USAID HQ protest day and all over X from the intelligence community and military and statecraft blob folks. You will see them say, but USAID is funding irrigation canals and famine. If they are doing irrigation canal work, it is because they are trying to control the river systems in the country, in Ethiopia. Or, for example, when they were irrigating the fields in Afghanistan. Well, guess what they were doing there? They were growing the heroin supply. As their companion, the U.S. Institute for Peace, was lobbying the Taliban to keep the heroin supplies flowing, because it would be bad for Afghanistan and the world if they shut down the poppy crops. USAID was funding, the irrigation of those crops in order to keep the supply of heroin flowing. You see this time and time again. If they are doing famine relief projects, it is to control the food supply and therefore control the population and supplement that with sanctions work to make people angry against their government or dependent on the U.S. to dole out that food. Then, and take, for example, the job fairs. I just posted this just yesterday, and I've talked about this many times in the past 3 years. Mark Milley and Joe Biden in 2021 in their Special Forces prospectus game planned how USAID could do job fairs in poor countries in order to get people to take to the streets and riot and go on strike from their jobs, and so that it would help U.S. military operations by having USAID give free no-show jobs to Africans striking in race riots in Africa in order to basically, so it's a humanitarian job fair. But no, it's actually not. It's actually serving the dual purpose of rent-a-riots being organized by USAID. So USAID is just a mutant baby of the CIA and the State Department with a little top-up support to the U.S. military. And I could go on and on about this, but there's a lot of moving pieces to this story.
But I want to make sure it's a cutout for the CIA. Whatever the CIA wants to do with cover from the State Department, this is what they're doing. It's these types of projects, right?
Yes, that's why you see this money laundering operation out of there. They have a bigger budget than the CIA. The entire intelligence community combined is a $72 billion budget. And, so the thing is you park operations out of, I'll give you a great quote, for example. When USAID got busted running regime change work in South America by arguing that by using AIDS prevention, HIV prevention clinics, the USAID internal document said that those HIV prevention clinics would be, quote, the perfect cover, because counterintelligence in those countries would never look at an AIDS prevention clinic, an HIV prevention clinic, as a warehousing shop for intelligence organizing activity. So what happened is when the CIA got in trouble in the 1960s and 70s, they needed an ever deeper layer of plausible deniability for the dirty work. The CIA was only created because the State Department wanted to do the dirty work, but couldn't afford to get caught with U.S. government fingerprints on it. So they created a spy agency that did work claiming not to represent the U.S. government to do it. And then CIA started getting in trouble, and so USAID started taking over their business. And they do that in tandem with this group, the National Endowment for Democracy. They are, kissing cousins. They always move together in all things. This is a huge, massive, fundamental restructuring of the American empire that we're watching play out before our eyes. But there are many ways that, just like with Brexit, where there was this big referendum, a huge victory that Nigel Farage scored in June 2016, but they ultimately ended up stymieing the purpose of Brexit in many respects through the long marathon of layers of fights and implementing it afterwards. And assuming that we are able actually to shut down USAID, which is powerful symbolically on its own and sends a very powerful message. But in terms of how it will change things on the ground, that remains to be seen, because the plan right now is to merge it into the State Department. Well, guess what? That just gives the State Department a USAID herpes infection, unless the actual underlying operations are cut.
Why is it bad? Why is it bad to have your central intelligence? You're a hegemon. You're trying to keep the post-war international rules-based order going. you're trying to limit battlefield casualties. So the best way to do it is make sure that everybody's on the take throughout the world. Everybody's got a little piece of the action, Brother Benz. Why is it a bad thing to have something like the USA that sounds on the surface of it? You just saw the big crocodile tears they're crying on MSNBC. It's for humanitarian projects. It's for development projects. It's to help bring water to the village. And that's a pretty good cover. Why is USA? Why do we rip the mask off and say it's a CIA? And what is the advantage to the American people? You mentioned that it gave the money to a same sort of folks throughout the world. Who are those folks, and why is it an advantage to the populist nationalist movement and the American working man and woman to basically rip the mask off, face what it is, and then shut it down, sir?
Well, this is a very, very complicated question, and I really hope that Trump World Foreign Policy folks understand the open heart surgery they're conducting on the way our foreign policy operates around the world. And in terms of why it's a bad thing that USAID does what it does, this is one of these questions that, you know, I've known and followed this stuff for many years, but I never made a crusade about taking it on until USAID got in the business of censoring the internet. And at that point, and censoring Americans on the American internet, and censoring American social media companies as a foreign-facing humanitarian NGO sponsor, that everyone knows is just the CIA's plausible deniability layer and funding conduit. But when it started to be used against Americans on American soil, that to me was the final straw. That no matter how useful it may be to spend $40 billion a year bribing warlords in Africa, bribing oligarchs in Ukraine, bribing and recruiting terrorists in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Syria, disguising medical supply vans, in Venezuela with boxes of AK-47s and military supplies. The fact is it is no longer a foreign policy instrument. It is a domestic control instrument, and that is the final straw. You can't do that to Americans.
Do you have any evidence in all your research, because you're like the axe in the space, that it's actually been used domestically against Americans, not just for doing warlord stuff like that, but actually against Americans?
Oh my God, yes. The USAID in 2021, they made a formal policy pivot to stopping disinformation on the internet, and they targeted U.S. technology companies. They targeted Facebook. They targeted Twitter 1.0. They targeted YouTube. They targeted all of the online information space. They were working with NewsGuard and Global Disinformation Index, and they were partnered with the State Department's Democracy, Rights, and Labor. They have which works with USAID's group called the Democracy, Human Rights, and Rule of Law. I'm sorry, Democracy, Governance, and Rights Bureau. And what they did is, under the banner of democracy promotion. See, this is the thing. They're supposed to be a democracy promotion organization. It's one of the reasons that they are accountable to the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They said that missing
Mike,
disinformation.
I know you got to bounce, but I just want to hold you to a short break and for a minute or two afterwards. I just want to make sure when we leave this today, people understand that you've made the case of why this place is dangerous and not some humanitarian thing, giving out money to like the nuns to save the orphans in sub-Saharan Africa. Short commercial has been on this idea about a government, an administrative state and deep state that's been out of control. Benz has been on this for years. So, Benz, when they actually start to allocate money to domestic programs and to all the misinformation, shutting down free speech on the internet, like against War Room U, everybody, that money's allocated. We had this audience sat through the appropriations, the individual bills appropriations, and Eli Crane and Matt Gaetz making this case, I think back in the summer of 2024, 23 and 24 for two different authorizations bills. That time, less than 50% of the Republicans backed them. These things didn't pass in these subcommittees. Was anybody overseeing this? Did people on Capitol Hill know that they had started to use this to target American citizens, sir?
Well, let me clarify that, because there's a distinction here, which is that USAID does work that has dramatic impact on our domestic politics and domestic American-to-American affairs, but they funnel it through international organizations that operate on U.S. soil, rather than rather than, for the most part, directly with U.S. organizations, although they do. For example, the USAID partnered with the American Bar Association for, in these type of things. But for example, the USAID gave $27 million to the fiscal sponsor of the Soros prosecutor control group. That, everyone here, you talk about Soros prosecutors, and Soros funds these prosecutors, and then Soros funded NGOs, in particular this main one called Fair and Just Prosecutions. This group that tells Soros prosecutors what to do. Well, that group got more from USAID than it did from George Soros. They got its fiscal sponsor did $27 million to the Tide Center, which also played a major role in fomenting Black Lives Matter, as one of the main parent groups to the Black Lives Matter groups. You have to understand, USAID is at the dead center. It occupies the center space between the State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA. It's a switch player that serves as a plausibly deniable assistance agency to the rogue activities of those three federal agencies, and it represents essentially the sum consensus of the foreign policy establishment, the legacy foreign policy establishment that hated Trump with a passion, wanted to take him down because of his foreign policy views and because of his economic nationalism here at home. And what USAID declared doctrinally is that populism is an attack on democracy. They say this openly in USAID meetings. They say this openly in USAID documents. I published this a year and a half ago. The USAID disinformation primer published the first month of Biden's term in office, saying that the purpose of their disinformation programs was to eliminate populist subject matter expertise on the internet, because populist news sites undermine USAID programming by undermining public faith and confidence in democratic institutions. Because, don't you know, USAID spends billions of dollars to control the media every year. All the major media outlets in Ukraine are funded by USAID, like the Kiev Independent. All of the major news outlets in Western Hemisphere or in many parts of Africa and Central Asia, it does what the CIA used to do. Everyone remembers Operation Mockingbird. Well, guess what? That's just called USAID Media Sustainability and Media Assistance. Okay, that's all that is. And when populist waves swept the world in the U.S. in 2016 with Trump, and with what happened all over Europe with Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini and Nigel Farage, USAID declared censorship holy war against every single populist group, including Bolsonaro. Steve, I'm telling you right now, if USAID did not exist, Bolsonaro would still be the president of Brazil, and Brazil would still have a free and open internet. It was USAID that spent tens of millions of dollars of American taxpayer money funding the push to get anti-misinformation bills passed in the parliament there, funding the legal advocates who pushed the censorship court there, the TSE, to crack down on Bolsonaro tweets and WhatsApp and Telegram messages. They built a censorship octopus in Brazil, and it was built entirely on USAID because USAID declared Bolsonaro a populist, Trump of the tropics, and then set up this operation to control the information ecosystem there. One of the USAID grantees even said on a public call that the purpose was to eliminate the international exchange of ideas between the Trump movement and the Bolsonaro movement. That's what USAID does. They kill domestic populism because it gets in the way of their foreign policy goals.